except whenever I would lose a round, he would be able to choose a body part of mine that he would either be able to touch or kiss. My name is Lulu King. I grew up in a really small town in Durban called the Bluff. And we grew up as a bit of a different family on the Bluff. The Bluff was very much a English, slightly Afrikaans town, but we were one of very few black families that got a chance to grow up in the area. So integration was very important for my family. And my gran was in a relationship with a guy who had lots of friends come over. He was pretty social. He was the father figure of my life.
Let's go play out.
He had a friend who would come through quite often and have dinner with us, who came across as the kid-loving uncle in our neighborhood, but really would spend a lot of time leading me back through our back garden and teaching me all sorts of interesting adult games. So my first sexual assault, and what would now, I guess in terms of the law, be classified as rape, was at the age of 4. And it's something that I've flashed back in and out of throughout my life.
Mommy?
But the memories that came back to me as I grew up were a lot darker. And so I remember this family friend suggesting that we played a card game, Snap. It's pretty common. And it was a typical Durban hot, humid day. Most of my friends were either at creche or school. My gran was at work. Her partner was at home, but he was working in the workshop. And this particular uncle was going to take me into the garden and play a game of Snap with me. Except whenever I would lose a round, he would be able to choose a body part of mine that he would either be able to touch or kiss. And whenever he lost a round, then he would give me a list of body parts that I could choose from, that he would do the same thing around. So it really wasn't a win-win situation at all. And it got to the point where 9 times out of 10, I'd be completely naked throughout the entire game as a very young little girl. But at the same time, he was somebody who was trusted by our family, that I considered an uncle. And I was always asked to keep our little secret as ours because my gran was just generally very strict. And he had said to me that she probably just wouldn't understand and she would want to take the fun out of our one activity that we had together. Clearly that wasn't the reasoning behind it, but I was 4 and knew nothing better. But it stopped finally when my aunt moved in and she went looking for me the one day and found me in a state of undress. Felt uncomfortable, but still didn't red flag it for the family. And a few days later, after it happened again and again, during bath time, discovered that I had had swelling and bruising around my genitals. At that particular point in time, she reached out to my gran and other members of the family, including my mom, and they decided that the best way to handle it was an intervention. When the family meeting happened, I kind of just hid behind a couch or behind the wall and eavesdropped in. I remember the level of blame that was appropriated by my gran, suggesting that I'd somehow put it out there for this man to physically interact with me in a sexual nature at that age. My mom had had me when she was quite young. My mom had had me when she was 16. So one of the things that came up was the fact that it was this repetition of promiscuous behavior that my mom had exhibited as a young girl that was being continued through me. And then there was a conversation around how to handle the embarrassment that I'd caused the family. So it was agreed that this particular family friend would never be able to come over again, but in the same breath it was also agreed that we wouldn't be involving the police or letting anybody else in the community know, because as the only black family in a predominantly white area, that would be us causing trouble. My gran alluded to the fact that there'd be a good chance that nobody would believe us, but more than that is that the process would be more trouble than it was worth, and the best thing to do would be to teach me to keep my legs closed. I remember, even at that age, being overwhelmed with this feeling of shame, and maybe I had done something wrong. That in that moment, that I didn't have anyone that would have my back or protect me if anything went wrong. And that became the narrative for my life. In starting my foundation phase of school, I was so incredibly driven because I knew my validation would never come from this person. And so the only way that I could kind of feel better as a human being was excelling at sports and being the girl that the teachers liked the most, because if other grown-ups liked me enough, then maybe they wouldn't let stuff happen to me, you know? Maybe they would see the little girl who didn't deserve the stuff to happen. And I grew up with this insane amount of pressure that I put on myself because I so badly wanted to be worthy of basic forms of love. And how that translated was I started dating relatively early. He grabbed me by the throat with both hands and he threw me across this parking lot, 7.5 months pregnant. Met a guy that was absolutely amazing. But because he was a rugby player, what he symbolized more than anything else for me was...
Are you sure you're okay to do
it? A protector.
I'm perfectly sober, thank you very much.
And I had my matric dance a couple of years later. Took somebody that I was seeing at the time. But when we got to the after party, ran into my ex and had a moment where all I could connect to was just that moment of safety. So in like less than 5 minutes, broke up with my date. Stuff happened and we landed up making our way to the bathroom so we could find a more private space to make out. But in the course of that, he got a little bit more sexually aggressive.
Stop it, please stop.
At this particular point in time, he resorted to sodomy. And it didn't really matter that I'd said no at that point because I was already in a bathroom stall with him. I was sodomized for a period of about 3.5, 4 hours. And by the time he was done, I walked out of that bathroom and I remember being incredibly self-conscious around how I was walking because I was very aware of how much I was bleeding, and I just plastered a smile on my face and faked it all the way home until I could run myself a hot bath and sit in the bath and just figure out how badly injured I was. At that particular point in time, when I reached around, I could feel parts of my lower intestine hanging out of my body. But what I did know was that my gran was the only grown-up at home and I couldn't tell her because we'd done that before and it didn't work out so well. So I just kind of pushed everything back inside. And climbed into my dressing gown and went and sat at the kitchen table like every other girl my age was doing at that particular point in time and told my parents, my gran, about how wonderful my matric dance had been. I sat there for like an hour and a half faking my way through this conversation and pretending that I'd had the most amazing night ever. just bleeding through this gown and hoping that she wouldn't send me for a cup of tea so that I'd stand up and she'd see how much blood there was. The fear of her finding out was much greater than the fear that I'd experienced through the actual ordeal. And then when I was around 19, my mom passed away. She had been in an incredibly abusive relationship with my stepfather for many years. And so the one person who could understand the level of pain that I'd experienced was gone. And it's hard. I'm sorry, this is the one part where I can just never get through. But my mom's death was a huge, huge moment in my life where I realized that I was completely alone. And I did what was natural to my pattern, which was settle into the next big relationship as a means of recreating that feeling of family and that sense of belonging, and fell in love really, really, really quickly. By this time, I discovered that he had also come from a very abusive history, and I felt like he could really connect with my story and what had happened with my mom. And us opening up to each other during those, weeks in that little village led to us feeling a little bit more connected as second-generation survivors. And all of those things made me overlook the outbursts of rage and the control, and because this was just so much bigger. Those were things that we could work through, but this was the connection that I'd never had with another human being in my life. And in the middle of this huge rant about how it wasn't working, that I was just doing my own thing, said to me, maybe we should just get effing married. Will you marry me? Still kind of shouting on the phone. And all I heard was, the person who has loved and protected me now wants to do this forever. Like, this is the ultimate form of worthiness right here.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And I said yes, and I was over the moon. We moved to East London. I found a job first doing sales for an IT company, and eventually found a job coaching rugby at a primary school up the road. We found a little granny flat in between, and everything was very quaint and cute. But things changed dramatically because 2 months later, I found out that I was pregnant with our son. We went through this pregnancy. I became happier in the pregnancy, but our relationship dynamic shifted because as my career grew and I found myself falling in love with this other human being that was growing inside me, he became a lot more controlling. I was no longer allowed to drive. He would drop me off at work. He would pick me up every tea break and then be there 5 minutes before the close of every day. After I'd finished making dinner and serving dinners, he'd lock me in the house and leave and go out with a new bunch of friends that I'd really never met before. And so throughout the pregnancy, as I got bigger, things got a lot more heated. He wasn't as physically attracted to me anymore. He met a girl on the cast. They had a very public affair. And we got married when I was 7 months pregnant with my son. And things were just getting worse. And so the one day, I pulled her aside in my most dignified, trained by my gran voice and went, I'm so sorry to bother you. It's probably a me thing because I'm hormonal and a little crazy at the moment. But I'm a little uncomfortable with how close you are with my husband. And because we're new in our marriage, I'd really appreciate it if you just gave us a little bit of space. She said nothing. But had clearly gone to him during the course of that evening's rehearsals because by the time we were driving back home, he wasn't speaking to me. And he pulled over in the parking lot of a public pool and started screaming at me. But it was the first time I'd actually argued back during one of his heated moments. And I'll never forget it. It was the first time he raised his hand. because I wouldn't stop speaking and telling him what I thought. And in that moment, I saw my stepdad. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do the thing that my mom never had the chance to do, and I'm going to go now. So I opened the car door, and I slammed the door and walked off. I was halfway across that parking lot, and I don't think I heard the footsteps as much as I felt them. Because he came out of that car and he ran for me, and as I turned around, he grabbed me by the throat with both hands and he threw me across this parking lot, 7.5 months pregnant. I think the action shocked him just as much as it shocked me, because he looked at me and you could see he felt this massive amount of guilt, and straight away I went and, reached in to give me a hug and explained that he just lost his temper and it didn't mean anything, and begged me to climb into the car and promised it would never happen again. And I went home with him that night with every intention of telling someone and getting help with leaving or just leaving. But it didn't happen because he felt so bad, and he referenced the fact that his dad had done this and he would never actively want to be this person, and I forgave him. Screaming my lungs out, because at this particular point in time he'd now picked up a big serrated knife. But as the rest of the few months of that pregnancy progressed, it would happen more and more and more, and his MO was choking me until I was nearly passed out. I had my son. Things calmed down for about a month, and then it began again. When my son had turned about a year old, and it would just escalate into things like him punching through walls or throwing me into the prefab wall. But now he would do it while I was holding my son in my hands. And the sense of urgency that I felt in my mind around ending the relationship were increased tremendously, because I was so desperately aware of my son being exposed to it, and the fact that one day he would do something where my son would get physically injured and I would never be able to live with myself. So I started planning and saving a little bit, but still not actively doing anything. I met a guy through work and began a bit of a flirtation with him. He was a client, but nothing very serious. But he'd picked up on there being some sort of energy or chemistry. So unbeknownst to me what he was doing, he'd parked down the road, and if I climbed into the company car with one of our technicians, he would actually just follow us and see how long I'd be spending during a particular activity to see if there were any patterns around who I was going to see more frequently. And one day I got a phone call. It was around 2 in the afternoon to say that my son had fallen off the jungle gym at school and broken his arm. And I ran downstairs to reception. By the time I got there, he was already inside reception. And I walked towards him, but there was something off in the way he was looking at me. And I said to him, "How is our son?" And he goes, "I'll tell you about it just now," which was also a really strange reaction for me. And so I paused before I walked all the way towards him, and he could see that I was thinking twice about why he'd asked me to come out of this building. So he took a step forward and he grabbed a handful of my hair and just pulled me over the turnstiles. And he felt nothing, but I think the thing that killed me is nobody did anything. And he dragged me by the hair to the car, and he locked the door and put child lock on the door and started just punching me in the face. For me, that was the beginning of the end. And when he did that in broad daylight, I knew that there was no intention of actually working through any of this. There was never going to be an apology at the end, and this was it for both of us. And then he started driving and asking me about this guy. And I dread the robots on the way because every time he stopped, he'd have more time to use both his hands to hit me even more. And I'm banging on the windows and I'm screaming, and people are crossing the road right past me, and they'll look and then just keep walking. Not a single person once tried to intervene in this 5-6 kilometer drive. He opened the electric gate and drove into the driveway, but not too far in, because as he was driving in and he was closing the gate, I had somehow managed to open the door and was now running up the driveway and got through. When I got inside, he had now hit a run, chased me in, closed the sliding door, locked it, and he would lock door after door and throw the key across the room. So I remember running from room to room trying to find a window or a door or something and screaming my lungs out, because at this particular point in time he'd now picked up a big serrated knife. And as I started making my way towards it, this white city Golf pulled past the driveway gate and then reversed and stopped. By the time I got to the end of that driveway, it was clear to me that the person in the car was not a police person at all. So I got to the electric gate, started to climb all the way up it, and he came out laughing, opening the gate while I was climbing. Started my divorce proceedings almost straight away, because after watching my mom go back time and time again, I knew that there was nothing about the situation that was going to change. And it was on that particular day where I decided to start working in the space of gender-based violence. Didn't matter how much other corporate work I was doing, I'd always make time to do this one particular thing where women knew if they phoned me, I would put my life on the line to get them out of those situations. So we started the organization and named it after my mom.